Ang tao, ang bayan,
Ngayon ay lumalaban!
Sigaw ng taong bayan!
Hi, this is Caliw-caliw and this is the definition and nature of social movements. One of the earliest and most comprehensive frameworks we get for how to analyze a social movement comes from American anthropologist David Aberney in 1966 in his book titled The Peyote Religion Among the Navajo. He provides us with a really great definition, and he says, a social movement is an organized effort by a group of human beings to effect change in the face of resistance by other human beings. By this definition, a social movement is differentiated from purely individual efforts from an organized effort such as crowd action. If indeed these efforts are truly unorganized and from efforts at technological change which proceed only against the resistance of the material world. Under the heading of resistance by the other human beings included passive resistance or apathy. It should be noted that the definition does not require that the resistance be organized. And he goes on to give us 4 types of social movements, and those are alterative, redemptive, reformative, and transformative. And he categorized these based on how much they are trying to change and what they are trying to change. So, whether or not they are trying to make change at individual level or at societal level, and whether they are seeking partial change or total change. So, going through each of the 4. Alternative movement. An alternative movement is after partial individual change. It aims at partial change in individuals. An example of this would be like Mother Against Drunk Driving. They are after the simple individual goal of trying to make people stop drinking and driving. Another example of this would be efforts to promote recycling. They are merely trying to get individuals to recycle their garbage. So, the alternative movement is after partial individual change. Redemptive movement are after total individual change. So, these aim at a total change in individuals. The defining characters, Aberley says, is the research for a new inner state. These are most likely, most often, religious movements. So, going after total change in a person are religious movements that promises salvation through a complete personal transformation as an example. Reformative movement. These are after partial social change. Aberley says that they aim at partial change in social systems. So, an example would be the women's suffrage movement. The movement of women to gain the right to vote. They really wanted a change of a part of the system, and they wanted to have equal voting rights, the same as men. So, reformative movements are partial social change. Transformative movement. These movements are after total social change. So, Aberley says they aim at a total change in social systems. Revolutions fall into the category of the transformative social movements. An easy way to determine between transformative and reformative is that the people that are involved in a reformative movement usually want to be included equally within the current system. So, the women's suffrage that I mentioned, they wanted equal to men, but within the current system, they wanted to be able to vote. Transformative movements, revolution, typically seek to somehow change or destroy the current system altogether rather than merely being included equally within it. So that's a way you can determine between the two. Aberlis provide us with a lot of discussion of how we should classify movements, and he give us a few things that we need to look out for. The first thing he talks about is that social movements are usually, if not always, combination of the different types of social movements. So, never is a movement purely transformative as an example. And movements are usually one type at one time. So they might change throughout the course of the movement. Also, very often at the same time, there are more than one type of movement. So, a revolution might be after complete change in a social system, but at the same time is also after a change at an individual level. So we have to be concerned about that when we're classifying social movements. We also have to analyze the ideology of the movement as a whole and the ideologies of the individuals and their behaviors that are involved in the movement. So, movement might have very specific slogans and mottos and policies that they are seeking, but we also have to analyze the day-to-day behaviors of the people within the movement. There might be a contradiction between these two things, or they might be exactly identical. But when we're classifying a movement and trying to determine whether it's alternative or transformative, as example, we have to look at what's actually going on in the day-to-day lives of the people involved in the movement, as well as the formal messaging of the movement itself. The other thing we have to take into account is we have to contextualize social movements when we're classifying them. So we have to analyze the historical periods in which they are occurring, or we were analyzing a modern movement. We have to look at modern society and analyze that the movement is existing. So we need to consider things like, what are the power dynamics of the time? What groups are in power? What groups are seeking power? What kind of expression is going on? Where is that taking place? Is it the institutional level or the individual level? We have to analyze things like that, like what the norms are in society at the time. And that's specifically important when we're talking about the means that are used by a social movement, because that means that a movement used a century ago might be not acceptable to use today in modern society. It might go against the norms or vice versa, so we have to contextualize the movement historically when we're making that analysis. So, American anthropologist David Aberley in 1966 provides us with a really great framework to analyze and classify social movements.
Theories of social movements. Why do people organize into collective action? What motivates them to do so? There are 4 theories of social movements of Kendall as cited by Alimboyugen: relative deprivation, resource mobilization, social construction theory, frame analysis, and new social movement. Let's first discuss the relative deprivation. People who are discontent when they compare their achievements with those of others consider themselves relatively deprived and join social movements in order to get what they view as their fair share, especially when there is an upswing in the economy followed by a decline. The feeling of deprivation relative to others may result in revolutionary social movements.
As you can see on the video, health workers stage a protest in front of the Department of Health to demand for unpaid benefits. That's a good example of relative deprivation. This fight is not just a matter of fulfilling the economic needs of the healthcare workers, but rather this is a fight for justice. Health workers pushes them to leave the domestic health sector and find better work opportunities. Healthcare workers are deprived of their rights to avail what is provided by law, and this will deprive millions of Filipinos to access quality care.
Wala dapat pinipili, wala dapat kinikilingan. Ang virus ay pangkalahatan.
Second theory, resources mobilization. Resources mobilization theory is used in the study of social movements and argues that the success of social movements. This is a variety of resources like money, members, access to media, and material goods such as equipment that are necessary for social movement. People participate only when they feel the movement has access to these resources. A key issue for social movements involves obtaining access to resources. In multi-year, protracted crisis, a lack of funding and resource mobilization can create substantial barriers for project implementation. Underfunding of relief operation is an ongoing issue, especially when the attention of donors.
Such issues are directly affecting environmental programming in protracted crisis. In times of underfunding, environmental-related projects may not be regarded as a part of the core humanitarian operations.
Social movements organizations require resources and continuity of leadership. Third theory, social construction theory, frame analysis. What is frame analysis? How frame analysis apply to social movements? Based on the assumption the social movements are interactive, symbolic defined, and negotiated process involving participants, opponents, and bystanders. Frame analysis is used to determine how people assign meaning to activities and process in social movements. In other words, reconstructing the stories we use to describe the world. Example, the sociology gender study of how society influences understanding and differences between masculinity and femininity. We are now in the last theory, the new social movement. The focus is on the sources of social movements, including politics, ideology, and culture, race, class, gender, sexuality, and other sources of identity are also factors in movements such as ecofeminism and environmental justice.
Examples of those new movements include the women's movement, the ecology movement, LGBTQ rights movement, peace movements.
Hi everyone, this is Dana Meryl and this is Social Movements in the Contemporary Society. Hashtag para sa bayan, para sa pagbabago. Change, pagbabago, we all want that. The change for the better, especially for issues involving the society. So you might be asking, Dana, what are social movements then? Social movements are purposeful organized groups, either with the goal of pushing toward change, giving political voice to those without it, or gathering for some other common purpose. Social movements intersect with environmental changes, technological innovations, and other external factors to create social change. Today, we will elaborate certain social movements observed in society. Environmentalism as a social movement. As cited by Alimboyogan and others in 2017, environmentalism can be described as a social movement or as an ideology focused on the welfare of the environment. Environmentalism seeks to protect and conserve the elements of Earth ecosystem, including water, air, land, animals, and plants, along with the entire habitats such as rainforests, deserts, and oceans. Environmentalism works to correct the damage as well as prevent future destruction. There are 4 types of environmentalism that can be distinguished through their beliefs with regard to the environment. First, the green economist. This is a movement that believes in the inherent value of a world economy, but also believes that the present world economy has an insufficient accounting system for human well-being and economic value of nature. The movement believes that the economy should have balance between equity, environmental protection, and monetary economic needs. The green economy is defined as an economy that aims at making issues of reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities and that aims for sustainable development without degrading the environment. Examples are the renewable energy in China, organic agriculture in Uganda, sustainable urban planning in Brazil, forest management in Nepal, and ecosystem services in Ecuador. In our country, the National Eco-Labeling Program, Green Choice Philippines, is one of the country's initiatives to exercise the fundamentals of sustainable development. It aims to change the behavioral patterns in consumption and production that tend to misuse, abuse, and degrade our environment. Second, the deep ecologist. It is a movement that focuses on the inherent worth of beings apart from their function in the ecosystem. The movement emphasizes the interdependence of all living things in the biosphere. The term encapsulates two main ideas: that all life systems, from living organisms and ecosystems to human beings, are interconnected and have integral value, and that economic, energy, and environmental policies should be designed to protect the well-being of all nature rather than to enhance human life and well-being. Tree planting and man-made forests are examples of deep ecology. Humans may plant trees to conserve the environment, prevent soil erosion, and providing habitat for other organisms. Aquaculture includes fish farming, allows for the conservation of aquatic species, and may be seen as an example of deep ecology. Here in our place, Calaveria, Cagayan, being a coastal town, we always implement coastal cleanup drives to safeguard the cleanliness of our shores, to prevent water pollution, and to maintain the grandeur beauty of our pristine beaches. To sum it up, what the deep ecology wants us to keep in mind is that the relationship that we have with the environment should be a give and take one. Always remember that the principle of deep ecology is that every living being, human and non-human, has its own essential value and does have its own right to live and flourish. Third is bioregionalism. This is a movement that stresses the significance of bioregions as defined by their natural boundaries. This movement concentrates on the independent function of separate bioregions to address their own specific needs. Bioregionalism is a comprehensive way of defining and understanding the place where we live and the aim to live in that place sustainably and respectfully. There are 185 bioregions in the whole world. One major benefit of this bioregional framework is that it allows for the integration of all three types of ecoregions, terrestrial, freshwater, and marine, into a cohesive system. Australasia has 15 bioregions and 3 subregions. The Indomalaya or Southeast and South Asia has 18 bioregions and 3 subregions, wherein the Philippines and Sulu Sea Tropical Forest bioregion is part of the Indomalayan subregion and is made of 9 ecoregions. First, Luzon rainforests. Second, Luzon montane rainforests. Third, Luzon tropical pine forests. Palawan rainforests. Mindoro rainforests. Greater Negros Panay rainforests. Mindanao Eastern Visayas rainforests. Mindanao montane rainforests, and Sulu archipelago rainforests. Bioregionalism reconnects us into the living biosphere through the places and regions where we live. Bioregionalism acknowledges that we not only live in cities, towns, villages, or countryside, we also live in watersheds, ecosystems, and ecoregions. And the last one is social ecology. This movement believes that environmental problems originate from deep-seated social issues, from where issues stem from social and political conditions of stratification. The movement considers that environmental issues can be solved by the collective effort in solving the problems at hand. As a body of ideas, social ecology envisions a moral economy that moves beyond scarcity and hierarchy toward a world that harmonizes human communities with the natural world while celebrating diversity, creativity, and freedom. For instance, the Pasig River pollution. No single person can clean the polluted body of water alone. Thus, one person asks for help from the community members and from the community officials as well. Through this initiative, the presence of the problem and the presence of cooperation balance the situation, thus being able to successfully solve the environmental issue. These concepts makes us realize how social movement can really play a huge role in taking action and responding to the needs of the environment. We usually take many things for granted, such as the fresh air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the water that we drink, the ground we walk on, and so on. And all these things are that planet Earth gives us for free. It's therefore very responsible of us not to play an active role in showing some gratitude to planet Earth by playing an active role in taking care of our environment. It's therefore a responsibility by virtue of being alive to be an environmentalist. And it is high time for us to be more aware of the social movements that aims to further maintain and protect the environment. It would not hurt us if we could only take part. This is Dana Merrill for Social Movements in the Contemporary Society.
When people hear the word feminism, usually they align it with angry ladies in the 90s, 1970s, or 1980s with the terms like man-hater or worse, But these days, being a feminist isn't someone who hates men. And it isn't even necessarily someone who identifies as a woman. Take me for an example. I call myself a feminist. Anyone can be a feminist, and you don't have to be politically active to support this cause. Life is not a competition between a man and a woman. It's a collaboration. This is Sandy Caliw-caliw, and welcome to Ladies First, where we talk about what matters. The feminist movement refers to a series of social movements and political campaigns for reforms on women's issues created by the inequality between men and women. Such issues are women's liberation and rights. In effort to change that include fighting against gender stereotypes and establishing educational, professional, and interpersonal opportunities and outcomes for women that are equal to those for men. Feminism is one of the most prominent social movement that is recognized across the globe. To give you a grasp or idea on the ideologies of feminism, I will present to you some of its basic ideas. First, we have the work to increase equality. Feminist thoughts links ideas to action, insisting there should be a push for change toward gender equality. This ideology pushes us to walk the talk. We should not only advocate for women with our voice, rather we should genuinely show it in our cause and actions too. Another basic feminist idea that we have is the expand human choice. The feminists believe on the idea that both men and women should be able to develop their human traits, even if they go against the status quo. If a woman wants to be a mechanic, she should have every right and opportunity to do so. This idea advocates that women are not to be stigmatized and stereotyped, because society has been picturing women as trophy wives, that they are meant for cooking, cleaning, serving, and that they are dependent. However, feminist idea says otherwise, and that this stigma needs to stop, because women are capable as much as their counterpart. Let's take, for example, one of the most prominent names in lawyering, my idol, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This iconic woman has dedicated herself and to her craft and to her work. She has been an associate justice for the Supreme Court of the USA for 27 years. Amongst his male colleagues, and has been a champion of women's and gay rights as she argued historic cases before the court. Another basic feminist idea we have is the elimination of gender stratification. This is another feminist principle, is the elimination of gender stratification. The movement proposes that laws and cultural norms that limit the income, educational, and job opportunities for women should be opposed. This seeks greater gender equality by focusing gender norms and marginalization of women in our society. It seeks to spark conversation on intersectionality and interlocking systems of power and how this contribute to the social stratification of traditionally marginalized groups such as women of color and trans women. Feminists advocate for greater representation of these groups in politics, business, and argue that society should be more equitable if policies and practices incorporated the perspectives of all people. Another basic feminist idea we have is the end of sexual violence. The feminists believe that government must eliminate all forms of sexual violence, and this should take priority is all lost in society. A tangible example that I can show you or tell you of how our government is somehow exhibiting such is the Republic Act 8353 Article 266C, wherein a rape victim's case will be dismissed if the victim is married to the offender, or if the rape victim marries her rapist. See? And last on our list of basic feminist idea is to promote sexual freedom. The feminist advocates that women should have control over their sexuality and reproduction. So those are the basic feminist ideas. I hope you have a grasp to it. And now we are moving on to the contemporary feminist perspective. First we have is the liberal feminism. This is a particular approach to achieving equality between men and women. This thinking emphasizes that women are entitled to full legal and social equality with men and who favors changes in laws, customs, and values to achieve goal of equality. This movement is rooted in classic liberal thinking that individuals should be free to develop their own talents and pursue their own interests. It sees gender inequalities as rooted in the attitudes of social and cultural institutions. Liberal feminists do not see women's equality as requiring a reorganization of society, but they do seek to expand the rights and opportunities of women that focus on protecting equal opportunities for women through legislation. Another perspective that we have is radical feminism. It emphasizes male control and domination of women throughout history. This perspective views the control of women as a group by men as the first and most fundamental form of oppression. This movement believes sexism is so deeply rooted in society that the only cure is to eliminate the concept of gender completely. It also suggests changes such as finding technology that will allow babies to be grown outside of a woman's body, to promote more equality between men and women. Another contemporary feminist perspective is cultural feminism. This emphasizes differences between men and women. It stresses that qualities, characteristics of women that have been devalued and should be honored and respected in society. And social behaviors are either an essential part of a womanhood or so deeply socialized that they are almost universal and unlikely to change. In cultural feminism, this is a movement that points out how modern society is hurt by encouraging masculine behavior, but society would benefit by encouraging feminine behavior instead. Another contemporary feminist perspective is the socialist feminism. This perspective is slightly less extreme than radical feminism, but still calls for major social change. It is a movement that calls for an end to capitalism through a socialist reformation of our economy. Basically, socialist feminism argues that capitalism strengthens and supports the sexist status quo because men are the ones who currently have power and money. So, thank you for listening. We have now reached the end of my part for our presentation. And now, please continue to lend your ears to my partner, Angeline Ligsay. So, Angeline, paso.
By the way, this is Angeline Ligsay and I will discuss the types of collective behavior. But first, let's define what is collective behavior. So, collective behavior is a term sociologists use to refer miscellaneous set of behavior, which is a large number of people engaged. More specifically, collective behavior refers to a relatively spontaneous and relatively unstructured behavior by a large number of individuals, acting with or being influenced by other individuals. So, we have here different types of collective behavior. And according to Panopio, there are several types of collective behavior. These are:
So first is crowd. When we talk about crowd, the first thing that comes in our mind is large number of people who gathered together with a common short-term or long-term purposes.
But to Panopio, crowd is a transitory group of persons in ambiguous and to some degree unstructured situation where participants do not have a clear and pre-existing knowledge of how to behave but sometimes can be done. This means that crowd is a temporary gathering of people who share a common interest or participate in a particular event, regardless of size, whether if it is few dozen people or millions. Crowd come together for a specific reason, such as wedding, a concert, a riot, and etc. There are several types of crowd. We have here the casual crowd, conventional crowd, acting crowd, and expressive crowd. Casual crowd. This is spontaneous, loosely organized, and very momentary type of grouping whose members come and go. It is a temporary attention to the person or object which has aroused their interest. This means that these are people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. It has no common identity or long-term purpose. Example of this is people on a mall who do window shopping. People are looking for specific clothes or things that they want to buy, and to this degree, they have the common goal, and that is to buy things. But this goal is temporary, and this particular collection of people quickly disappear once their goal is achieved. Next is conventional crowd. So conventional crowd is characterized by established regular ways of behaving, depending upon the time and place of performance and order of activities. So ito yung mga planned gathering of people at a specific event at defined place and time. So, ang mga tao dito ay nag-gather for a special purpose and they behave according to the established norm. So, one good example of this is attending meeting in school or barangay because the people involved are those people who gather for purpose and can interact with each other in a varying degree. And ito yung mga taong pumupunta sa isang event na magkakasama dahil ang kanilang dadaluhan ay nakaplano or scheduled na. Gaya ng example, assembly meeting. We also have here the acting crowd. So, acting crowd refers to an active, volatile group of excited people whose attention is focused on controversial or provocative issue which arouses action, if not indignation. So, ito yung mga collection of people who's focused on a controversial event that provokes anger, desire, or etc. So there are two good examples of this. So those are people protesting while President Rodrigo Duterte is delivering his speech during the State of the Nation address, or those people who are against Marcoses. So madami nagrarally para ilaban ang kanilang rights sa government. So ang mga iba dito ay galit na galit, at kung ang kanilang ipinaglalaban ay huwag pabalikin ang Marcoses, ito'y kanilang ipaglalaban. So dito sa acting crowd are those people who focus on specific goal or action. So meron silang goal na gustong makamit. So yan ang acting crowd. In acting crowd, we have also the mob and riot. When the acting crowd become violent, it is called the mob, which is dangerous for the people within the crowd. And when the crowd becomes frenzied without any specific purpose, it is called the riot, which is dangerous for the surroundings of the crowd as the people often take part in random acts of violence. Lastly is expressive crowd. Expressive crowd is characterized by rhythmic activity, intense emotional contagion, and emotional release. Example of these are those people in a concert of Travis Scott. These people are enjoying the concert. They are very hyper and very excited to see Travis. But because of that excitement, they can no longer control their emotion. They're rushing to go to stage, they are shouting, screaming, cheering, and without realizing that some of the fans are died because of pushing to each other just to be near with Travis Scott. Second in the types of collective behavior is panic. So panics are those situations in which people are largely affected by fear. So a panic is a fearful arousal or collective flight based on generalized belief which may or may not be accurate. So this means that panic is the reaction to a threat that can cause people to act irrational and self-destructive ways which can in turn cause harm to an entire group. So example of this is COVID-19. 'Di ba kapag sinabing magla-lockdown na naman yung lungsod or bayan natin, di natin maiiwasang magpanic. So lalabas tayo, bibili ng pangangailangan natin, at dito nagpa-panic buying na tayo. So dahil sa paniniwala natin na kapag nag-lockdown, mahihirapan na naman tayong bumili at lumabas ng ating bahay. Third is mass. So, this is the diffused collectivity made up of number of desperate individuals, each responding independently to the same stimulus. So, ito yung mga anonymous member from small straits of society and all walks of life who are concerned only about their individual life or condition. Fourth are fashion, fad, and craze. So these are forms of collectivities or mass interaction. So first is fashion. So fashion is relatively short-lived. So socialized approved variation in various areas of behavior. So this means that fashion is a temporary standards or appearance, thinking, or behavior that enjoy the widespread of acceptance. So ito yung mga sinasabi nating trending na kapag umuso, ginagaya natin. Gaya na lang ng crop top na umuuso ngayon na halos lahat ng kababaihan ay nakikiuso sa trending na ito. Pero ito ay panandalian lamang. So, tignan nyo ngayon, hindi na ganon kasikat o kauso ang crop top. Next is fad. So, fad refers to a passing fancies or novelties of interest related to trivial deviation from the conventional behavior. So, fad ay ito yung mga bagay na very popular. Then, in a short period of time, nalalaos rin siya like sa mga memes, di ba? Ang memes, kapag sikat, yun lang yung nakikita mo sa newsfeed mo. O sa TikTok, na kapag popular yung isang sayaw or may bagong challenge, halos yun lang yung nakikita mo sa TikTok account mo. Pero kung titignan mo or napapansin nyo na after a few days, biglang lalaho yung very popular na yan. So, eto rin yung behavior that briefly catches attention. At eto yung rise and fall ng mga trendings. The other hand, we also have here the craze. So, craze refers to a mobilization for action based on a positive wish fulfillment. So, eto yung mga new activities which become important in the life of community. Pero ang craze is a temporary activity that attracts the obsessive enthusiasm of a relatively small group of people. Like, it is a rush towards some satisfaction, gaya na lang ng dance craze or computer games craze. Fifth is disaster behavior. So, disaster behavior is a type of behavior brought forth by a sudden or destructive set of events that overtaxes a community's resources so that outside aid is necessary. So, this behavior is brought by a sudden and unexpected event na nagdudulot ng burden to the community. Kaya naman, there is need from others. So, gaya ng calamities or typhoon. Lastly is public. So, public refers to a dispersed group of people not necessarily in contact with each other who share interests in an issue. So, dito sa public is the most unorganized and loosely held group of people who share common ideas. So, the public can be divided into 5 groups. These are.
So, first is interest group. So, interest group refers to an immediate concern in a way an issue is met. It shapes and sets the opinion. So, dito nakabasis sila in one or more shared concerns. Attempt to influence public policy in its favor. So, etong interest group na ito, sila yung nag-share ng desire to affect government policy to benefit themselves or their causes. Parang ang goal nila could be the policy that exclusively benefits group member or one segments of society. Two good example of this is government subsidies for farmers or policy that advances a broader public purpose. Next is disinterest group. So this interest group includes the spectators in position of judge. So if there is interest group, there is also disinterest group because in public type of collective behavior, it is not necessary that public or only have the interest group. Example of this is the election, wherein I am interested to Bongbong Marcos while most of you are not. So that is disinterest group. So kung sa'yo gustong-gusto mo siya, while sa iba wala siyang pake o hindi sila interesado sa taong gusto mo. Yan yung disinterest group. We also have here the pressure group. So pressure group is similar to interest group whose activity is to pressure decision-making bodies to act favorably on the side of the issue it is fighting. So eto yung mga tao or people who organize actively for promoting and defending their common interests. It is also called so as it attempt to bring a change in public policy by exerting pressure on the government. It acts as a liaison between the government and its member. Next is following. So following refers to a group of people which is interested enough to follow issues but which makes no attempt to form
opinions regarding it. One good example of this are those people na nakikiuso kung sino yung kanilang ibobotong president this upcoming election. Just like sa napanood ko sa TikTok na nagtanong yung isang interviewer kung sino sa mga tatakbong pangulo ang kanyang iboboto at ang kanyang pinili ay si Bongbong Marcos. But when the interviewer asked why, the interviewer said na wala lang, nakikiuso lang. So eto yung mga taong nagkakainteresado na sumunod dahil lang ito ay uso. Lastly is neutral or listening public. So it composed of individuals who have not yet decided which side to follow. So example dito is upcoming election. So most of us ay di pa nakaka-decide kung sinong iboboto natin for president. Di natin alam kung saan side tayo follow or susunod. So for us to choose, magga-gather tayo ng information, magre-research tayo, hanggang sa makadecide tayo kung sino yung karapat-dapat na tumayong president sa bansa natin. Pero karamihan ngayon ay hindi pa rin nakaka-decide kung sino sa kanila ang pinupusuan nilang pangulo. So yan ang neutral or listening public.
Hashtag para sa bayan, para sa kalikasan at para sa pagbabago.
Hashtag speak for your rights.
If you can create a social movement that people want to join, they will bend their energies and ideas to you. And again, this is Caliw-caliw.
Hashtag gender equality.
Different group, different situation, different behavior. These are the social movements and collective behavior. And one thing that I know, that in a certain group that you belong, there is a certain goal and rights that you want to achieve. So let's all say, hashtag achieve your goal and fight for your right.